Diane, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you, William. Nice to have you down in beautiful downtown Glebe.
It's a pleasure. Before that final parade on the 24th of June 1978, can you tell me what your involvement was in lesbian and gay activism?
This is going to be a long answer because it started in 1973 at Monash University, where as a member of both women's liberation and gay liberation, and then going on to the general women's liberation and gay liberation meetings in the city at night and on the weekend, and being part of a group of lesbians that got involved more in the women's movement, and then being part of Radical Lesbians in Melbourne. And we just had demonstrations all the time in those days. I mean, it was huge.
So you were living in Melbourne?
Yes, I was at uni.
You were at uni in Melbourne. Were you familiar with groups such as CAMP?
Not in Melbourne. There was Society 5 in Melbourne, which was a very conservative, more a social than a political group, and it was more for gay men. So there was quite a divide then between the bar scene, as it were, which we didn't really know about in those days, or I didn't, and the gay liberation scene, because we were about being out and things like that. So yeah.
And what brought you to Sydney?
Oh, I dropped out of uni and I came here for 2 weeks in 1973, and I'm still here.
You're still here. So before that Mardi Gras, had you been involved in a lot of activism in Sydney?
No, it was my first week in Sydney, and I came to the first national gay and lesbian demonstrations, which were held concurrently with Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide and Brisbane. I think Brisbane. And I got arrested in 1973 in my first week at that demonstration. The cops were being the usual, rough, just bashing and grabbing people and stuff.
Were you bashed yourself?
No. Well, I was pushed, and my glasses were a bit. One of the lenses fell out. And
were you
like that.
Thrown into a paddy wagon?
I managed to get in by myself.
And you were charged, presumably?
I was charged. There was 3 women and about 7 men arrested at those demonstrations in Sydney. And I had a newspaper photograph. The 2 uniformed police just came up behind me and grabbed me, so wasn't much I could do. And in the court, 2 detectives got up and swore in the court that they'd gone through all the normal, all the legal, if you like, ways of arresting me and things like that. And I was charged with assaulting police, resisting arrest and unseemly words or something like that. Of course, I hadn't done any of that. I'd just been at a demonstration. But that was the norm back in those days, particularly in Sydney. And I ended up getting off the charge, which was again highly unusual, because whilst the magistrate didn't actually say the police are lying, he had a black and white photograph out of the Sydney Mardi Herald with me being grabbed by 2 uniformed police. So he had to say there was reasonable doubt.
Was your name published, your address published?
No, not that I recall. And just going back to the current day situation with the Sydney Morning Herald and publishing the names, addresses and workplaces of those arrestees on the 24th of June at the first Mardi Gras and the subsequent related protests on their front page, Chips McAnulty, who was one of those arrestees, makes the point that he was arrested a number of times in the late 70s. His name was never in the paper until that night. So it was a deliberate anti-gay and lesbian effort by the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, designed to amplify the hurt that was there.
And on the 24th of June 1978, am I right in thinking there was a march in the morning, there was a meeting at Paddington Town Hall,
yes,
and then in the evening at about 10:30 there was a parade that went from Taylor Square. Were you involved in either of those earlier 2 events?
Yes, I was part of the Gay Solidarity group. I was also involved in various other gay and lesbian activities since I got to Sydney in 1973, but I was part of the Gay Solidarity group that organised that daytime rally, and members of that organisation organised the nighttime. It wasn't even called a Mardi Gras on the poster, it was just called more a street party, I suppose.
That march earlier in the day, what was the atmosphere like for that actual march?
Look, it was pretty standard sort of demonstration. We had our objectives and our chants and things like that. I think I was on the megaphone. I usually was at those things.
What were you chanting?
Oh, yeah, the usual: stop police attacks on Cajun women and blacks, get your laws off our bodies, which, you know, applied to a number of laws, but in this case, particularly the criminalisation of male homosexuality. Yeah.
Were there many police at that march?
Oh yes, we had a permit, and I think we marched into Hyde Park at that stage and had a few speeches and things.
Were the police civil?
Their normal self. I wouldn't say civil is ever the right word with how the New South Wales police were then, but there was no arrests. So. And
the events of that day, who were they organised by?
The Gay Solidarity Group.
And was it to mark any special occasion?
Oh yes, that was for Stonewall.
The riots.
The riots of Stonewall in New York, which is the birth of the modern gay liberation movement.
And then there was a meeting at Paddington Town Hall. Were you there?
No, I wasn't there, but I was certainly there in the night time. Yeah.
And so I think the parade started in Taylor Square.
Yeah, about a bit after 10 o'clock.
What was the atmosphere like?
Look, it was really festive, and people were having fun, and some people were dressed up, sort of in David Bowie style characters and things like that, and yeah, it was nice. It was good.
Was it seen as political by many, or as a more as a carnival?
Bit of both. It was more for our community rather than us making political demands, which the earlier demonstration was, and there were banners on the truck. And a sound system, and things like that.
Do you remember what the banners said?
Yes, International Gay Solidarity.
And you said there was a truck with music. Do you remember any of the songs?
Yes. Me Christians, Ode to a Gym Teacher. The Tom Robinson Band's Glad to be Gay. Amongst others.
So the parade...
On high rotation, I think.
So back to back, really. Go round and around. So you all went down Oxford Street.
Yes.
And there were police. Were there any police there at that point?
Oh yeah, the police were there. We had a permit to march.
And the police just sort of kept.
We were on half the road, and it was the other half.
The police were fine at that stage.
Well, it kept getting faster. We were hurried along.
What sort of numbers at the beginning of that parade, do you think?
Oh, 500-600 or something like that, yeah.
And then did people go into the bars and people started coming out of the bars?
No, people didn't go in, but we were calling out.
And what was that chant?
Oh, out of the bars and onto the streets. You've heard this before. And there were people standing there watching us, and some did come out, and passers by, like inner city folks and straight people and other people joined in as well. But some of the bar people were standing there and they were looking horrified at us because there was such a cultural divide in those days.
Really?
About being out versus, the hidden bar scene and being in the closet and stuff.
So a lot of people who were in the closet, they would go to bars, but they didn't want to be...
Well, it was culturally quite different, a culturally different thing. We'd pretty much come out of the universities and that whole kind of New Left and Women's Liberation, Gay Liberation sort of stuff. So it was culturally quite different, yeah.
So do you think the more commercial side of gay and lesbian life, i.e. the bars, in some ways they turned their noses up at a lot of the more political lesbians and
Well,
gay?
It was threatening, firstly. The bars were run by gay and lesbian entrepreneurs, but they paid the police off. So it was quite an interesting kind of mix there.
Protection rackets?
Oh, God, yes. Well, it applied to everything.
And was there much of a gay press back then?
No. Oh, well, the Star Observer just started, I think, that year or the second year. And they in their editorials said we shouldn't have a second Mardi Gras.
Really? Why was that? So you were going down Oxford Street?
Yes.
And you went towards Hyde Park?
Yes, and we were at the top of College Street and we were just milling around and I didn't quite know what happened, but they'd stopped the truck and grabbed the keys and tried to pull Lance Garland, the driver, out, and some of the women grabbed him back and he got back into the crowd. And someone else, word got around a little bit and someone else said, let's go to the cross. And it was just electric. It was defiance. We marched up to the cross yelling and chanting.
So you went down So Hyde Park,
College Street and up William Street.
Then
Yeah.
Darlinghurst Road.
Correct, left on Darlinghurst Road.
How many more people at this stage do you think had joined the parade?
Look, it was quite big. There was a couple of thousand by that stage. And by the time we got through to the fountain, the Alamein fountain, the march was essentially dispersing. I mean, we'd kind of made our point, if you know what I mean. And people had come out of venues in the cross and things like that as well. But as we were going up, you could see there was paddy wagons around and going up as well. And we were going up William Street, and I remember seeing paddy wagons going across the bridge, across William Street, into Darlinghurst Road. And effectively they trapped us in the middle of it, so they came up Macleay Street and then the other way and blocked it off.
The permit itself, just to clarify, the permit covered what exactly?
Covered marching down Oxford Street and going into Hyde Park.
So the people went down, further down College Street and into William Street. Did they do it as an act of defiance, or was it because they wanted to continue partying?
No, it was purely an act of defiance, and we were chanting and we were marching, and it was kind of to the cross. It was just, everyone just went and joined in, sort of thing.
And near the fountain, which is where King's Cross Police Station is now, you were fenced in, you're saying?
No, we started, once we got there, people just started to disperse and drift away. But at that stage, then the police fenced us in between the Coke sign and the fountain, along that main stretch of Darlinghurst Road, King's Cross.
So you were surrounded, really?
We were blocked in. Yeah.
Were the police looking for a fight, do you think?
That's putting it mildly, William. It's putting it very, very mildly.
So you were all surrounded?
Yes.
For you, were you terrified? Were you angry?
I was really, I was really upset. I was really exhilarated, but then I was kind of really worried about what was going to happen. Now, my girlfriend had me and Ken Davis in a doorway on the opposite side from where a lot of it was going on. I had my leg in plaster and Ken was in a frock. So we would have been both prime, whatever, and she made me stay there. So this is the way it was. But I had a really good view, and it was just, I remember the next morning still being really traumatised by it all, things like that, by what I saw.
But that evening, the police were presumably being verbally abusive. Well, they've been quite physically abusive too.
Well, they just weighed in and started grabbing people and throwing them at paddy wagons.
Were they beating anybody with the batons? Do you remember?
I didn't see that, but I saw some very rough handling of people, throwing of people and things like that.
And so you saw people being thrown into the paddy wagons?
Yeah.
Were other people in the parade trying to release them?
Oh, of course. People were trying to get them back and things like that. And look, people from the cross joined in. The normal denizens of the cross joined in because they had a beef with the police as well, because they arrested people and bashed them up and raped them, and that was what the police did in those days. Those Darlinghurst police.
How many people were arrested?
53.
And where were they taken?
They were taken to Darlinghurst Police Station, and which is just down the road, which is a very notorious police station. We were outside chanting and singing "We Shall Overcome."
Was that same evening?
That same evening.
But in the cross, at what point did the police sort of disperse themselves and leave all the other paraders to their own business?
Look, it was a melee that went on for quite a while. I know I was down there for at least half an hour or so, and then it was midnight and my leg was still in plaster. I was a bit sore, so I lived nearby. I went home. But just seeing that amount of violence was very, very scary. And I'd been to lots of demonstrations. I'd seen arrests before I'd been arrested, but this was many levels above that.
Really? So you all went to where they were being held?
Yes.
And you were chanting?
Yes. And people could hear us inside, we heard later. And I also understood that the women were then taken down to Central Police Station, but the men were still held at Darlinghurst.
Were many of those people who'd been arrested injured?
Well, Peter Murphy was seriously badly bashed, and I think they thought they'd killed him when he started fitting. That's what I heard later, and they stopped beating him at that stage. Dr. Jim Walker was allowed in because people went off. There was no mobile phones, no ATMs in those days, but people went off to ring people on public phones and get bail money, get lawyers and doctors. And Dr. Jim went in there and said this guy should be in hospital.
And then the next morning, presumably bail money came in, or was it that same night?
Oh, it would have been a mixture of both.
And do you know if the prisoners were just held or if they were actually questioned?
I can't answer those questions. You'd have to talk to some of the arrestees.
And what was the reaction in the press like?
Look, it was all very pro-police.
The Sydney Morning Herald. Am I right in thinking it published the names?
Names, addresses and workplaces of all the arrestees on their front page.
And many people, well, some of them lost their jobs.
And some lost housing, some lost, their families reacted badly, things like that.
And some of them presumably would have been outed to their families as well, and their friends.
Yes, and some of them, we understand there were some suicides as well.
Was there any politicians backing the case or well-known people who were getting behind those arrested?
Well, we had the Council of Civil Liberties that participated in the march. They provided, lawyers there did provide free legal support for those arrested. I was a witness to seeing different people arrested, so I went down and gave statements to them, things like that, and I appeared as a witness in court as well.
How long did it take for the first court cases to happen?
Well, on the Monday following, the charges were mentioned in Central Court. There was a huge number of police there. We went down there as well. A number of demonstrators, and they just wouldn't let us in the court. They blocked the court. The magistrate ordered the court to be open and the police defied that. And Peter Murphy and Chips McAnulty had just gotten out of hospital and were walking up the steps and got punched in the face by police.
Really?
Yeah.
So Peter Murphy hadn't just been assaulted that night.
He had to go to hospital. Yeah, but he was assaulted again.
Assaulted again?
Yeah. So.
Were all the charges eventually dropped?
All except Peter Murphy's. And a few people who didn't go through with the group, I think, because there was legal representation provided from the Council of Civil Liberties. There was various people put forward as test cases and things like that. And the thing is that they were found not to have arrested people properly, which was kind of the normal thing. They're supposed to give 3 minutes to disperse. Well, none of that happened. It was 10 seconds. So.
Peter Murphy's case, that was dropped, wasn't it? He was actually. What was his punishment? What happened?
Well, look, you'll have to talk to Peter about that. But his was the case that was not dropped. So.
What influence do you think that Mardi Gras parade and the subsequent arrests had on government policy?
Well, what I know from talking to people later was that the Labor government at the time they did not control the police. They could not control the police. The police were a law unto themselves. And I know Rand's Chief of Staff, I knew him later on, he said, every brief we got from the police we thought was a lie. So it was they were a law unto themselves. They were notoriously corrupt, notoriously violent.
And with the police, do you think they were so violent and abusive because they were homophobic or because you were challenging authority, or a bit of both?
A bit of both. Our chant at the time, Stop Police Attacks on Gays, Women and Blacks, was there for a reason. Because women's demonstrations got attacked. I remember I was at a Women's Liberation march at one stage, and some women just got grabbed, and I heard one of the police officers say, "You demonstrate, we arrest." Now this was a march with a permit, so it was just the attitude of the time.
What was the reaction? You've said there was very limited gay press. What was the reaction in the gay press after?
Look, I don't even know much of that. There was a gay press at the time. I think the SSO might have started up a bit after that time. I'm not sure.
We've now had an apology, or at least a sort of apology, from the Sydney Morning Herald. How do you feel about that?
Well, to say that it was custom and practice at the time is a lie, because it wasn't custom and practice to put it on the front page. It was. It might have been on some cases in some detail in the paper. And as I said earlier, Chips McAnulty's saying articles recently that he was arrested on a number of occasions at political demonstrations, and this was the only time his name was in the paper.
There's also been an apology in the Parliament of New South Wales.
Excuse me.
What's your reaction to that?
Look, I didn't expect to be as moved as I was, but I was, and the speeches were very, very sincere and moving, and I think that was effective. Yes, and I some people have used the word vindication. Some people have used the phrase, what goes around comes around, and things like that. But I thought it was well done. The apology by the Fairfax Press kind of slipped in at the time, and I think we need to have a bit more to say about that. And I think the 78ers will be having a bit more to say about that.
So,
yeah,
the one from Parliament you find was sincere,
yes,
but the one from Fairfax not quite so sincere, and more
Correct.
needs to be done. But with Parliament, so there's been,
and I'm still waiting for the police to apologise.
that was my next question.
Yes.
So with Parliament, we've had the apology,
but I think pigs will fly by then.
Do you think the parliamentary apology goes far enough, or does there need to be further restitution?
Look, I'm happy with what there was. I would have liked to have seen some stronger language, but in our drafts that we gave to the cross-party working group, and I'm really glad it was a cross-party working group that got this up, there were some stronger language, but there is something in there about, actually I've got it, but it places on record an apology to each and every one of the 78ers for the harm and distress the events of 78 have had on them and their families, and for past discrimination and persecution of the LGBTIQ community. So, I'm glad that bit stayed in. It's a bit of a general catch-all, and it doesn't really cover the attitude of police to a lot of, to bashing up gay men, to harassing lesbians, to murdering gay men and being part of the murders of gay men on the beats. Because a lot of stuff still goes on.
I know a lot of the apology was more specific to the 78ers at that Mardi Gras parade,
yes.
But a lot of other people who were at other protests that year and
Yes.
events and subsequent years.
Our definition of 78er is not just the people there on the night, it's the people involved in the campaign, the subsequent and related protests
But that
as well.
particular apology, was it aimed at them too, or just that
That
night?
was no. Well, that we tried to make sure it was aimed at the group involved in the whole campaign. So yes.
There's other 1978
Correct.
events.
Yes.
Also, when Bruce Notley-Smith MP was asked about a police apology, he said the parliamentary apology covered the police.
Yeah. Well.
How do you feel about that? Should there be a separate police apology?
Yes, there should be a separate police apology. And there should be some sort of inquiry into the police who bashed up Peter Murphy and all the other matters that I just mentioned as well.
One thing that a few people have commented on was, although Mike Baird, the Premier of New South Wales, was there at the beginning of the apology, he didn't actually speak himself. Should that apology have come from the Premier?
Look, I think it's, having seen various law reform put up, if the Premier's acknowledges it and is in there, well, that's a level of support from the party. The opposition leader Luke Foley was there, while John Robertson led on behalf of the opposition as well. So it's kind of the normal way things are done. Bruce was a good person to move it. He's gay. He told his own personal story of what it meant to him, and that was also very moving.
So when you are marching in the parade with the 78ers now, they have the bus and everything, how do you feel when you see all those crowds cheering you on?
A bit amazed in lots of ways. I need to wear earplugs with the disco music from some of the other floats. And look, we've been honoured to lead the parade on the 20th, the 25th and the 30th anniversaries. And I think we did it on the 35th, or we were close to the front on the 35th. But yeah, so it's pretty amazing.
How do you feel when you see the police taking part in the parade?
Look, in some ways, particularly early on when they first started to march, it was a bit of a goosebumps moment for me because they were I thought they were brave given the amount of homophobia in the force and the fact that they would get that from their colleagues. I think it's a good sign, and like the Mardi Gras in general, which I think has to be there as a beacon for young people coming out, for people in country and regional areas and in other countries, to say that, you know, being lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer is transgender is okay.
How has the parade itself changed?
It's getting itchy again. It's gotten more commercial and less political. I'd like to see more political floats. I don't just mean politicians marching, and you know, it's good that the leader of the Labor Party, Bill Shorten, will be part of the Rainbow Labor float and things like that. And I know that you know, various Bruce Notley-Smith will be there again, and Alex Greenwich and people like that. But I'd like to see more political stuff and more commentary and stuff like that. And it's, I suppose Mardi Gras in the past has had this kind of the cheeky humour, subversive sort of thing happening, and I'd like to see more of that. Yeah.
The organisation, has that changed a lot? The Mardi Gras organisation?
Well, it started off as a committee. The second and third Mardi Gras were organised by the Gay Solidarity Group. The second Mardi Gras, we marched up the footpath on Oxford Street. I was a marshal at that one, and we were terrified that there'd be arrests, but there weren't. So that was pretty major. Look, it's grown into a bureaucracy. It collapsed, and that sort of thing. I was on the board of New Mardi Gras for 3 years. I was an elected member, and we put it back together with volunteers and you know, two or three staff at most, 2 or 3 paid staff at most. It's quite a big bureaucracy. I think it's got more sponsorship now. I'd like to see it a little bit more responsive to the community.
So that would be your advice to the current organisation, to make it more responsive to the community?
And be more political.
And a few years ago,
yeah,
the words, I think, gay and lesbian were taken out of the title and it just became Mardi Gras. How did you feel about that?
Oh, look, I think it's fudging the issue a bit.
When people were marching and protesting back in the 70s, often the message was about liberation. In the Mardi Gras now, we often see a big message about equality. For instance, marriage equality. Do they go hand in hand, liberation and equality, or are they contradictions?
They're not contradictions, they come from different periods of time. I mean, marriage equality was something we didn't even envisage in those days. We were fighting against psychiatric treatment of and brain surgery of gays and lesbians, with about therapy, aversion therapy, and all those sorts of things. We were fighting for legalisation of male homosexuality. We were fighting against the Summary Offences Act, which was repealed in 1979, which was used to harass people at demonstrations and arrest women who were kissing in the park. It gave police the powers to do what they like, pretty much. And even under the Summary Offences Act, I mean, we still proved that the arrests were not done correctly, were wrongful arrests at the first Mardi Gras and related protests.
Are there still issues, we mentioned marriage equality, but are there still issues that we should be campaigning for?
Well, discrimination is much more subtle in a lot of ways, and we've just got to be it's a matter, I think, of guarding what we've gained as well, because there's a homophobic backlash, there's a right-wing backlash. Those things can go in a trice.
What advice do you have for the young activists of today?
Get out there and make your voice heard. Get out there and be political. And be who you are.
Diane, thank you very much.
Thank you, William.